one of my favorite things, a system called Michael Teachings, which is actually a channeled system. But there's so many different characteristics, like different things, different parts of a Michael chart. So if you look at this key here, there's all these different archetypes, basically the roles: server, priest, artisan, sage, warrior, king, and scholar. And they have all these different characteristics aligned with them for each different role. So you have each chart, you have a different combination of these different things, like a different goal, attitude, mode, center, obstacle, body type, and soul age. So I'm going to go into his chart. So every chart in the Michael Teachings is divided into two parts. There's the essence, which is the stuff that stays the same for your whole reincarnational cycle. There's a big part of the Michael Teachings that talks about that we go through a reincarnational cycle as part of our lessons and the way that we experience life. That reincarnation is basically, it's just assumed automatically that we have past lives, and that we go through a reincarnational cycle and learn lessons, and we develop over several lives, like hundreds of lives sometimes, growing in maturity as we're going through different stages. Kind of like when you're going through school, you have different, you go to elementary school, then you go to middle school, then you go to high school, and then college. It's kind of like that in terms of the lessons you learn, but also I'll talk about his soul age a little bit, and there's kind of like levels of maturity that happen. But anyway, I'm going to talk about his essence first, which is the stuff that stays the same for his whole cycle. So basically, his role is a warrior, which is the most intense type, and it's very action oriented. It's more independent than the king, which is also an action oriented type. But it's more blunt and kind of rough, and they want them to go and do their own thing. But they're actually more intense than the kings in some ways. So everybody has an essence twin, and his is a priest. So the priest is more of the inspirational axis type. So they want to inspire people towards the higher good, towards what their kind of their spiritual purpose is. What I noticed in the chart, it says it's discarnate, but actually there's a note in the original chart I got that said that his essence twin was actually killed in the gas chambers during the Holocaust in like 1944 or something. So he was, at first, he didn't have as strong of an influence from the priest's energy, but like later on because he basically killed them in the process of the Holocaust. He actually got more priest energy after that. So he's a warrior priest mix, basically. He has a little bit more warrior in his cadence position, which is more of a secondary influence. And then he has some scholar and artisan. The artisan isn't very strong, but the scholar is really good for knowledge and seeking and understanding things and studying things. But basically, he's warrior dominant, and he's got a priest essence twin, which makes him more fit for being a spiritual leader in a sense. So there's something called orientation in your essence, and there's basically it's what domain of things you're focused on mainly, and so it's either truth, love, or energy. So truth is the highest manifestation of the intellect. Love is the highest manifestation of the heart, and energy, or it's also called beauty sometimes, is the highest manifestation of more of a physical side of things, a more grounded, energetic side of things. So because his orientation is energy, that means he's more attracted to war and action-oriented things and being really grounded in his body and very active. So that's really interesting to see that not everybody has that, but it's a really interesting part of his chart. His male-female energy is pretty balanced. It's 47-53. He's pretty much in the middle. His frequency, which is 61, is pretty much in the middle too. So he's not airy or too solid. He's kind of right in the middle, kind of more fluid kind of energy. This is pretty average. His previous cycles is 7. So what a previous cycle is basically we have a whole cycle, which is our reincarnational cycle. We go through our lives, and then once we're done reincarnating, we go to the higher planes to learn the final lessons before we merge with Source again. And then we go to a different planet and then do the whole process all over again, go through the different stages again, reincarnating, and then going to the higher planes. And so he's done that 7 times on 7 planets before he came to Earth, basically. So that's actually a little bit lower than what I've typically seen. So most of the people that I've seen, it's like 10 previous cycles, sometimes like 11 or 12. But the actual average on the planet is like 4. So he's actually ahead of the average. But I haven't come across people like that because it's just the people that are in my life are just not at that level. They're more, they've had more experience through several like thousands of lives living on different planets and having experience in different forms, different bodies and species on different planets, basically. So it's really interesting to see that he has 7 previous cycles because that's actually kind of lower than what you would typically see. So that means that he's not as advanced as you would think as other people, which is weird. So maybe it's why he's like approaching things in the way he is, because he just hasn't learned these lessons of this, like dealing with the shadow and that kind of stuff. So there's also some stuff you get in your chart if you get a Michael chart that shows your global job and community responsibility, and those stay the same for your whole cycle. So his is health. So basically, the focus is his global job is maintaining the health of the people he's influencing. And so what you can kind of see that and how that influences how he was interacting with Germany was he was trying to heal them from their dark, like broken place. Like he wanted to restore them in some way, but he thought about, like, the way he went about it was demonizing his out group, whatever he saw as the out group that wasn't really his part of Germany that he identified with. And I'll get into that in a second. And then his community responsibility is acceleration, which is basically a focus on, like, how do I learn the lessons that I'm learning right now so I can move forward in my evolution. That's basically a big focus for the community responsibility of acceleration. So anyway, the health one is actually a mix of server and artisan energy, and then acceleration is just a straight up artisan, double artisan. So that's just a little more information on that. So that's everything in his essence. That's the stuff that stays the same for his whole cycle on Earth. So now I'm going to get into his overleaves, which are the characteristics that he takes on for just this life as Hitler. So first I'll talk about his soul age. And so the soul age is the natural kind of lessons that we learn in our development. So these are kind of old names that I had for them. So the first soul age is focused on survival. The second one is focused on structure and becoming part of society. And then he was in the young soul age as Hitler, but he actually went back to the baby soul age, which is the structuring focus. And there's a couple more that he hasn't even reached yet, which is the mature soul age, which is about relating, and then the old soul age, which is about teaching or learning about context and understanding everything that you've experienced. So yeah, like I was saying, he's a young soul, but he was manifesting when he was Hitler. He was manifesting as a baby soul, level 2. So it's actually there's 7 levels. So level 2 is one of the earlier ones. So he went back after I've already learned the lessons about the baby soul age, and he went into the young soul age from past lives. but he actually went back for this life to learn lessons about the baby soul age. And so the baby soul age is also called the toddler stage of maturity. And basically you're really sticking to what you feel like is your truth, and you're really identified with your group of people. And then you basically have people who are outsiders or not part of your group, and so you might like even demonize them, or like want to get rid of them possibly. So that's, and also at that stage you're not so aware of some of the the things you're struggling with, which is like the obstacles, which I'll get into in a second. It's really interesting. So yeah, baby soul age it's an earlier stage of development. So basically, the U.S. right now is in young soul, like level 6, and they're stepping into the mature soul age. So that's more focused on relationships and inner emotions and being more introspective. We're not quite there yet. We're still in the young soul age, which is more focused on achievement and appearance and looking good and being successful and kind of the just do it kind of attitude. But the baby soul age is more conservative, kind of, typically. Doesn't mean that if you're at the baby soul age that you're conservative. It just means that you're learning some lessons about structure and fitting into society and learning how to do things the right way is one way to look at it. So yeah, I'll get more into that in a second. So another big thing that's really important in your Michael chart is your goal. So there's 7 different goals. So if you look at the key here, it's reevaluation, growth, discrimination, acceptance, submission, dominance, and flow. And Hitler was very clearly in dominance, which is focus on leadership. In its more neutral, like overall sense, it's focused on leadership and making an impact on others, being some kind of authority figure in your field for what you're doing. So it makes a big impact on others when you have the goal of dominance. But each of these characteristics have a negative pole. So if we look at the negative pole for dominance in here, I have this kind of list of all the different characteristics here. Let me find the dominance real quick. Hold on one second. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, it's more like you're a dictator. You impose solutions rather than catalyzing them. And you just totally, you just take over and dominate. You're not sensitive to who you're impacting. It's not necessarily for a win-win when you're in the negative pole. But at the same time, he was kind of leading people. It's pretty obvious that he was a leader. So that's his goal. Attitude is skeptic, which is on the expression axis, but is kind of more intellectual kind of thing. But basically, there's a tendency to doubt things and be skeptical of things when they come in. So that's kind of his attitude towards things, is to be skeptical. His mode, which is how his energy is, how he uses his energy, is aggression. Both dominance and aggression are these red ones, which means that they're aligned with the king axis kind of energy. Aggression is the most intensely outward moving energy possible for modes. It's the most intense one. So it's just like going after whatever is coming, just like tackling it and going right after it. Very aggressive, obviously. So then there's also something called centers, which are intellectual, emotional, physical, or moving. And you have 2 centers, 2 primary centers. So his main one is emotional. So he's basically experiencing his emotions really strongly. That's what he's relating to primarily first. But then that goes into moving, which is the more action-oriented movement kind of energy. So you can see that with his kind of engaging with things and being very active, to have the moving as the secondary one. So now let's get into his obstacles. These are also called dragons, and I have this book that I'm reading called Transforming Your Dragons by Jose Stevens. Really awesome book. It's so good. It gets into each of these obstacles, and it teaches you ways to overcome the obstacles. So what's really interesting about Hitler is that he had all three of the exalted obstacles, the ones that are more outward moving and making more impact on the world. There's the more what you call like ordinal obstacles, which don't make as much impact on the world, and they kind of make you close down and shrivel up in a way. These ones make you kind of like more strongly making impact on the world. So he has arrogance, greed, and impatience, which is crazy because there's usually people usually have like two, sometimes one, but he had three obstacles. So he had a lot going on. He had a lot of like difficult energy that he was working with. But because he was manifesting as a baby soul, he was at a stage where he wasn't as clearly aware of those what those obstacles were doing and how they were affecting him. They were totally operative, and because he was in the baby soul age, basically there was a tendency to demonize the out group, what he saw as the out group, people that weren't part of his group. So the Jews, the Gypsies, whoever it is, he he demonized them and made them the enemy. And his arrogance basically is to like puff himself up, makes himself more important than others. The greed is a nonstop desire for more and more power, more influence, more attention, that kind of thing. And then patience is it's associated with fear of missing out, but it's also trying to rush things and get to the next moment, and there's a deep inability to be present in the present moment and relax in the present moment. So you're just always trying to get to the next place. Like you could be very goal oriented, but you're always like pushing to make things happen, and you're just impatient, which is really hard to deal with. So these are really hard. Like these three obstacles are really intense together. And they're the exalted ones, so it's pretty intense. I haven't seen this before with these three obstacles. I haven't seen anybody with three obstacles. So yeah, it's crazy. So now we'll talk about the body types. So the body types are different energies. Basically, they're in your bodies. Each body type has a different energy to them. So the mercurial is really made for communication. It's aligned with like planet Mercury, which is all about communication and intellect and that kind of thing. So it makes him a good speaker, basically. And that's his main body type. Then he has lunar, which is like the moon, which is more emotional and intuitive. And they say it's often genius kind of energy. So he has that too. And then he has a third type with a body type, Plutonian. And I heard it was like 3% plutonian, so it's just a little bit, but that's actually a lot. Like I haven't seen anybody with plutonian before. So you know how I was saying at the beginning of the video that Pluto was like a big influence, like it was discovered around the time that he was like born and this stuff started happening with with the Holocaust and all that. He actually had energy from Pluto as his body type. And what that basically means is like you're gonna have a big, like massive scale influence on others, but also if in the negative pole, it has a tendency to, I mean, it can make such a big impact, but it can make a, a negative impact that goes on for generations, like a huge impact on a grand scale. So it's pretty scary to see that he has the plutonian and he was more in the negative pole of it. So it's really interesting to see that because I've never seen that before. So a really interesting body type combination there. So his quadrant, which is basically you have different kind of roles you play in group settings. What kind of energy you usually take up and what role you play, and he takes power. So he's the one that takes charge in any situation. He's the one that's like, okay, we're gonna go do this thing, and let's go do this, and that's basically his quadrant, is power. And then everybody has different needs. They have three needs, three primary needs. His is freedom, exchange, and communion. Freedom is just being able to do what you want, and then exchange is having one-on-one connections with people and communicating back and forth and having any kind of exchange. It could be like physical touch, it could be through conversation or giving things, but it's like a back and forth, kind of like an equal kind of thing, which is a need to bond with people one-on-one, basically. And then communion is his last need, which is he wants to be part of a community and have some kind of connection to greater society, to his community. So that's all his needs. So that's all his stuff in his Michael chart. So what you can see is he has a lot of this like action oriented axis stuff, like being a warrior and having secondary warrior, energy orientation. He's a young soul, but he's manifesting baby. And he's dominance, goal, aggression mode, moving centered, impatience. And then he has all the exalted obstacles, which is pretty intense, especially at the baby soul age, where they just want to demonize the out group and take control, and they're just so unconscious of these patterns operating. Skeptic, he's emotionally centered mainly, mercurial. So yeah, really interesting stuff. It's just crazy to see his chart and see that he was basically destined to be a leader, but he was embodying so much darkness and shadow stuff, and he wasn't even aware of his shadow because he was projecting it onto the out group, what he saw as his out group. So it's just really dark shit.